This is Robert Mardlacci, the Mindshare Learning for Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. And welcome to this week in our Can-Am Global EdTech special edition with two legendary EdTech leaders, Kathy Hurley and Bobby Cushman, for a sneak peek of their soon-to-be-released book, InnovateHERs, Why Purpose-Driven Entrepreneurial Women Rise to the Top. Thank you for joining me this morning.
It's great to be here.
We're enjoying it already.
And of course, we have Laura Smullian joining us as well, one of the integral team members and researching and writing. Laura, why don't you say a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this wonderful project?
Sure. So I was lucky enough to meet Bobby through my master's program at the University of Pennsylvania called Education Entrepreneurship. She was one of my advisors there, and talking to her about her projects, she asked me to participate in some of the research for one of the books she was working on, which was the basis of what eventually ended up becoming InnovateHERs, in the book that we're just about to launch.
Awesome. That's a great segue to introducing Dr. Bobby Cushman, who is the president of EduCorp Consultants Corporation and senior innovation advisor at the Graduate School of Education, Entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania, and former education industry entrepreneur. She's received numerous awards that include recognition with the WISE Prize, the King of Bahrain UNESCO Prize, 2019 most influential corporate board of directors, 100 EdTech influencers, and the Laureate Tech Awards, technology benefiting humanity. Thank you for joining us, Dr.
So glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
And Kathy Hurley, last but not least, my former senior vice president at the Learning Company School, along with Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary back in the day. Kathy started her career at IBM and wrapped it up at Pearson as a senior vice president there, and also wrote a book prior to this, and we'll be asking her about the inspiration on that, Girls Thinking Global, and also received numerous awards, the Association of Education Publishers Hall of Fame, prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award in Education Technology from SIIA, and she was co-editor with Priscilla Shumway of Real Women, Real Leaders, Surviving and Succeeding in the Business World. Thank you for joining me as well, Kathy Hurley.
It's always great to be on the podium with you.
I love the title, InnovateHERs, Why Purpose-Driven Entrepreneurial Women Rise to the Top. What was the inspiration for the title and the book?
Well, I'll start, and then Kathy and Laura can certainly contribute. I've been a typical university professor at a Research One university. Of course, you have to do research and publish, and I've been doing research thinking about the entrepreneurial mindset of entrepreneurs for the last 9 years. And I published several articles and did traditional research. And I decided that these stories were really more interesting than just academic, putting them in an academic journal where about 2 people read it. So I decided that we needed to have something that was more oriented towards the general population, towards trade. And we needed to figure out a way to present the research in a way that was storytelling. And that's where we came up with the idea. And that's how Kathy got involved, because she's, as you pointed out early on, she's the great storyteller and the great networker. So she was going to help us tell these stories. And of course, then Laura got involved with looking at the research. And then when we began to look at the research and its connection to the stories, Laura was able to help take that research and write it and help us write it in a way that the stories connected to it. The title is sort of a more interesting story. We spent lots of time, we went through many titles. And I think as a group with our publisher, we hit upon InnovateHERs. We thought it was something we didn't pick right away because we thought, well, everybody had it. But it turns out when we did a search, there weren't a lot. Nobody had copyrighted it. Nobody had the
Brilliant. Title. Fantastic. And Kathy, over to you. So you've written a book in the past, Real Women, Real Leaders, and it's about storytelling and relatability. And you've met and worked alongside many inspirational women leaders who have gone on to achieve great heights. Talk to me about how this is different from your first book.
Well, I want to go back to say one of the things we haven't mentioned, Bobby and I have known each other for probably about 35 years. I've always had great admiration for all the research and the work that she has done. So we talked about doing something that would be a little different, and it's much different from real leaders, real women, real leaders, because we wanted to have an international focus. So, and we looked at a lot of diversity. We have a great group of women, all age groups, all ethnic groups from 6 continents, one of them from Canada, which I think you know, and we can talk about that.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to make this not just telling their stories, but looking at, the strengths that these entrepreneurial women have, and looking at the strengths, looking at some of the barriers they've had to, handle, and then look at take snippets from each of their stories and put them into the different categories. So the book is set up very differently. The research is very strong that shows what entrepreneurs do, and it's been great working with Laura. She is the absolute millennial. Every time she's on a call, she's in a different country. She's out and about, but she is glued to her computer at all times. So it's been really great having the 3 of us. I think we bring different strengths to the project, and it's been fun getting to know everybody.
And thank you for that. And a special note on the millennials like Laura is that I've never been more optimistic about the future when I meet some of the millennials. They get a bad rap oftentimes in media, but I've met some incredibly inspiring millennials like Laura, and including my own kids. It's about parental engagement and getting the skills and mentorship, right? How important is mentorship along this entrepreneurial journey? If you want to jump in, Bobby, you can kick it off.
Well, I would probably jump in and tell you that our greatest mentor is sitting on this podcast with us, and Kathy actually spent most of her time working on the mentoring chapter in our book. It got a whole chapter, so I'm going to let Kathy talk about how important mentoring is to the book and how we got to where we were and made it such an important part of the book.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in mentors, and I think people who have been mentored become good mentors. I think you learn a lot from the people that you're working with, and it doesn't matter if it's men or women. We have a section looking at women because it was a thread that really went through the book. These women were successful because they had mentors, but we feel that it really doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, as long as people have mentors that are going to help them. Right. And we found that mentors start at very early ages. We found we had some good information where it kind of starts at home with parents and siblings, and it goes out to friends and getting, through school, that mentors come in all shapes, sizes. A good place for mentors is certainly the workplace. And I think we all, and Laura, please jump in, and Bobby, but I think it's really learning from examples. I mean, seeing people, who have read really good examples that you can follow. And you have to be a caring person. I mean, I think that's a very important part of being a mentor. You have to really care for people. You have to like people. So, I think that's something that we believe, women really need to help other women. We see that a lot now. And so we want to continue building mentors.
Yeah, and we did find one of the things, we really found 3 themes throughout the book, mentoring being a big part. But we found 3 things about the research that when Laura started analyzing the research with me, we found out that women entrepreneurs all entrepreneurs should be risk takers, but they were more thoughtful risk takers, or more careful risk takers. They did their homework better than men. We also found that they had a lot of self-confidence in a different way, but they still had a large imposter syndrome where they didn't think, even people that are CEOs and work for the Prime Minister of Canada, like they still had an imposter syndrome that maybe they shouldn't be there. And as Margaret said, she learned how to change every time she went to a different embassy to reinvent herself. But the third thing related to mentoring that we found was they had a much higher personal sensitivity or empathy scale.
Empathy.
And that was kind of a factor that played a big role in how we structured the book and how we looked at the themes of the book. We also found that women with those skills took on large leadership roles. And Laura could comment because she looked at the data with me in multiple ways. Laura?
Yeah, I think so. Tying together what both Kathy and Bobby are saying, I think one of the most interesting parts of the research was showing how internal factors like mindset, right? So we think about entrepreneurial mindset as something so intrinsic to each one of us, ties in with external factors like mentorship, representation, and all of those points that we know are super important. So how do those kind of integrate together? We had a great quote by Krishanti Omara Vignaraj, who said, you have to be able to see it to be it as a woman. So if you can see representation, if you can see an amazing woman mentor, like Kathy was saying, in your household growing up, then you can believe that you can achieve that too. And so we thought that was really powerful. And it talks, yes, you can have the mindset, but you also need the representation. You also need someone to kind of steward you through the process, especially in male-dominated leadership positions. And so returning to the entrepreneurial mindset research, we took a little bit of a deeper look at what was special about these women, right? So what really made them shine. And so we have this idea of entrepreneurial mindset, right? We have this idea, like, maybe the typical millennial entrepreneur who's like, Bitcoin and who's, attached to their MacBook, et cetera, maybe doing risky activities. But that wasn't what we saw reflected in the women leaders. And so how did they leverage their entrepreneurial mindsets, and what did it look like to them, right? It's not just a blanket phrase. What does that mean? And I think one of the most surprising things in that research was really seeing that entrepreneurial mindset doesn't mean that you have to be an entrepreneur. A lot of these women, for different reasons, had not started their own businesses, but had created entrepreneurial ventures within large companies. I'm sure both Bobby and Kathy can speak to that. But who had started programs within larger institutions and had been incredibly successful in pioneering change while still relying on some of these entrepreneurial characteristics.
It's fascinating. We here at the Mindshare Workspace, we're in an innovation center that we created in a shopping mall, first in Canada and North America. And we do a lot of mentorship and co-op and internships. And it's amazing to see how students thrive when they work alongside you and you give them agency. And that's really super important. I think, no worries. But I love the notion of inhibitors into converting inhibitors into activators. Talk to me a little bit about that notion, because I think that's really, really important.
That played a big part in, as we looked at bringing the conclusion of the book together, of how we were going to cover some of these themes and relate back to the research we did. And as Laura said, this was a 3-part research project. We did pretty intense research, over 250 entrepreneurs that came through our program at the University of Pennsylvania. We used a profile that has tested hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs using the profile. So we pulled from that data, and then we decided we would use that profile to interview a select set of women. So when we did that, we found out that they didn't all fit in little boxes, which we wouldn't want them to do. And we decided that there were several themes that we wanted to carry in that they all mentioned externally about having a safety net from financial stability, having family support, having the ability to their background and how they were brought up, and then we looked at what they had done to convert those into making them successful. And so that's where the terms inhibitors and activators came from.
I love it.
Another thing we found with women mentoring other women is they really had a lot of insight into the work balance, work-life balance. They could only learn from each other, which I think is important. And then I think the big theme, I think, of mentorship is really thinking about people who really believe in you and believe in your career. I think that goes a long way if people are really, believe in what you're doing, and that kind of theme kind of went through too. So I think the mentorship thing, I don't know, maybe it was just not just me, but I found that was really interesting. It was that important. The mentorship was that important.
Absolutely. Here's a question for you. What can you do to develop your entrepreneurial skills and traits to achieve career goals? Entrepreneurism, sometimes in education, there's a bit of a negative connotation around that, but it really comes down to problem solving skills, right? And the we call them the seven C's. ISTE has the four C's, Folin has the five C's, but it's really gives you an opportunity to hone your skills and help you prepare for life
Now,
and future careers.
if you look at the back of the book, you'll find our questionnaire that we used. And one of the questions we asked, which you just asked, are you born an entrepreneur? Or can you be, or can you be make an entrepreneur?
Great question.
We asked that of every one of the women we interviewed. And we found, interestingly enough, that they had to think about it. It was not a question that came straight to mind to them to the answer. Many of them believed that it was both, that you are born somewhat of an entrepreneur. You have to have certain innate skills. And if you look at the profile, there's things called personality skills and traits. And you can actually identify those personality skills. Many of those, as with anything in personality, you're born with. You can sort of change your personality somewhat, but people's personalities, you hear mothers say, oh, my baby's going to be stubborn. He's already stubborn, and I know he or she's going to be stubborn the rest of their lives. But there are things that you can make a better entrepreneur. I don't think I can make an entrepreneur, but I can make a better entrepreneur. And I can teach them a set of skills that would help, but I can't teach them to be an entrepreneur. And that came out very strongly in the book and in the answers we got to that question. So it was a really important question that we asked. We have lots of quotes in the book where we use some of their answers to that.
And building off of what Bobby's saying, is interesting. Some of those same inhibitors or challenges actually caused the women to build more entrepreneurial skills. So as they faced more barriers, as they faced, just bigger responsibilities, they had to build those skills, which are a little easier to build as time goes on, in order to be able to tackle the challenges and be effective in their roles.
Fascinating. Kathy, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And I think as you look at the book, I think we tried hard to make this not only a entrepreneur and leadership book for women, but a book that anybody would want to read. You could be, you could be in business, you can be in education, you can be, part of the family, friends. I think everybody's going to get something out of this as they read through these different categories.
I think that's an excellent point, and hence a comment came from Dr. Steve Jordans, who I've interviewed on a number of occasions, who's a professor at the University of Toronto, and he commented, entrepreneurs are indeed critical to helping large organizations stay relevant. I think, a man could stand to learn a few things. And definitely, when you mentioned empathy, that really resonated because I read some research around the country of Finland, and they teach empathy throughout the entire academic phase of K to 12. And they're one of the most high performing academic countries in the world. And when you look at the OECD PISA ranking, so empathy is becoming more of a thing in education and embraced, and not only, and that should cascade into the real world and entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah, it's very important.
I just think, again, by dividing the chapters up into things like empathy and passion, persistence, need to achieve, we could pull from these stories. It wasn't just one complete story on each person. It was pulling each of these instances and putting them into categories, which makes it, I think, very interesting.
I love how you weaved in all these global women leaders, and I mean, there's thousands and thousands of leaders out there. What was the process, the selection process? Because I do know some of them, and it's great selection, by the way.
Well, that's a good question. And we had a list. We started with a list of about 100 that Kathy and I would keep adding to. And then we looked globally. We looked diversity, both age diversity, region diversity, and ethnic diversity. And we think we did a pretty good job of pulling those out. We also looked for people that had sort of well-recognized positions and jobs. And we looked for sort of people that you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, there's somebody that I would put in a book, but we wanted to put their story out there because it matched so well with the research we were doing. So Kathy and I turned it down. We said we would have 25. We couldn't eliminate any. We ended up with 27 interviews. We actually did more interviews than that, but we ended up picking 27 of the ones we did. One of the interviews we did was with the woman who developed the entrepreneurial mindset profile. She was fascinated by what we were doing, and that's Pam Mayer. And she was also thrilled with the way we looked at the book and looked at her mindset profile. We also interviewed the people that were at the top of their game as well as just starting out. It was fun. Kathy and I interviewed every single one of them. We had an hour interview. They filled out an entrepreneurial mindset profile for us, and we talked about the profile. But mostly what we asked them to do in that hour long was tell their story. Because when people tell their story, we learn so much about them that they wouldn't share in a traditional PR interview or in something where they're sitting on a panel and get introduced. We asked them to tell their story, where it started and how they got to where they are.
Thank you for that.
Well, I think the other thing is looking at worldwide, you see that people are the same all over the world. We did look at different kinds of jobs. We have a variety of jobs. We have a variety of nonprofit as well as profit making, because we really wanted to build on this idea of purpose-driven people who are in these kinds of positions that are entrepreneurial. So I think the variety has really been great, because it shows where the similarities are, but also shows a lot of differences.
I have two questions for you that I hope to challenge you on. What surprised you? And how did this change you? How did it change you? What impact did it have? Right? Because, you have the benefit of getting all this incredible insight from, super successful women who achieved, and in many cases, came from nothing, or, through all the adversity, overcame all these barriers to achieve great heights in their own way. So who wants to kick that one off? What surprised you most?
Well, I'm going to talk about what surprised me, but I think the one that changed, and we don't have a whole lot of time, is we ought to ask Laura, because she's the one that worked on this, and I've seen her over the last year and a half that we've been working on this book. I've seen lots of change in her, so she'd probably be a good one to
Okay.
do
All right,
that.
Laura.
But in terms of surprise, I think what surprised me the most goes with what Kathy just said, that the women all over the world were so similar, and that they also even though they had high self-confidence indexes, they also, almost to the woman, had an imposter syndrome, that they don't know how they got there and why they got there. Even though they'll tell you that they have high self-confidence, they've all had some example of an imposter syndrome. And probably the one that gets pointed out mostly is being the smartest person in the room, or the one in charge, and walking into the room and they asked you to get the coffee, or they asked you to take the notes. And everybody had that kind of experience as they were rising to the top. So, but I'm going to let Laura talk about.
Thank you for that, Bobby. Over to you, Laura.
So I think what surprised me the most was two things. A little bit, one we already talked about, so I won't go too deeply into that, but it was just how essential having a role model is, especially at a young age for women. how crucial that was. There wasn't a single woman who didn't say, oh, when I was young, my grandmother, my mother, my father was an incredibly important influencer in my life and in my trajectory towards a purpose-driven career. That was fascinating. And then the second thing that really surprised me was need to achieve. So this is the skill that we know as, it might be more commonly known as ambition, or just the need to keep going to achieve a high level recognition. And none of the women self-reported that need to achieve was their strength. However, the research that we performed in the entrepreneurial mindset profile, it shows that it's the single most important skill for women, or a trait for women to have, which is fascinating. But it is this kind of taboo topic, right? And so no one really wanted to talk about it in terms of themselves. So Kathy and Bobby brilliantly in the interview began to bring it out of them in different ways. So talk about the impacts your organization has had with you at the helm of your project or your, in some cases, the company. And they kind of lit up, right? And so they said, okay, we've been able to do this initiative. We've been able to do this. We've had this amazing partnership, et cetera, et cetera. And they were able to talk about their achievements in terms of what it meant for their organizations. They were more hesitant to talk about their own awards. They were more hesitant to talk about their own personal achievements in terms of their career. And I was shocked by that. I was really surprised by that.
Fascinating.
Really interesting stuff. And it does make sense, right? When we think about the constructs in society and, women who are seen as ambitious can sometimes be seen as aggressive, and, how women had sort of, adopted that, but still been able to shine in the light of their purpose. And I thought that was really powerful. I thought that was just a really interesting insight. And
fascinating.
Just in terms of how I've changed, I think leaning into my own entrepreneurial traits too, and really being able to leverage where I shine, which is passion, which is also need to achieve, which is also action orientation, and being able to really embrace those and say these are positive qualities that will help me get ahead in my career too.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kathy.
One of the things that really surprised me is that in the leadership book, most people pointed to their fathers. And don't take offense at this, Robert.
No.
Most people pointed to their fathers for being the reason they were a good leader. In the entrepreneurial book, the majority pointed to their mothers, which made a lot of sense because they would always come back to, I watched my mother have a full-time job, raise 5 children, be part of the PTA, be part of the community. I saw her juggling all the time, which I think is kind of what an entrepreneur does, is really, really to take on new kinds of things. So that was kind of a really surprise to me. It made sense, but it was a surprise. The thing is that changed me kind of a little bit like what Laura said is that I always had a tendency I love networking, I love being with people, but being around people that I know. And this has really pushed me a little bit more to go be with people I don't know. And I recently was at a meeting where I was invited to a dinner with 25 women, and I didn't know one of them. And I went to the dinner versus going out with, a group of people that I knew. And it was just wonderful sitting in a room and learning from these other people. So I think it's kind of pushed me, as someone, you get to a point, you're retired, you think I don't really have to learn new skills. I mean, that's a lot of me because you really are always learning. So that was great for me.
Well, amazing. So what about the growth mindset? Because that's ingrained in you, right? So that was a growth mindset moment, right? Where you could have defaulted to the comfort zone. But like myself, I always enjoy going into and meeting new people. I'm curious by nature, and it gets me in trouble sometimes. But talk to me about, touch on that for a moment, and how what you saw through your research around that growth mindset.
Well, I've done a lot of work in growth mindset independent of the book, before the book, as part of the entrepreneurial mindset. And I've always thought that it was a direct connection between entrepreneurial mindset and growth mindset. And it kind of links back to my own, what changed me about the book was I began to be convinced even more that I can't teach entrepreneurship. And I started a master's program at Penn to do just that. And I've seen it evolve into teaching entrepreneurial mindset, not entrepreneurship. But what I learned about growth mindset is it absolutely links directly to one of the entrepreneurship skills, to be about being able to change and pivot quickly. That you have to be able to grow all the time, and entrepreneurs that are successful are able to do that. And I learned that.
Amazing. So it strikes me that this book is not just for women. We men could learn a lot from this book, and I'm so fascinated by the stories, because it is about storytelling. You really embraced a global perspective. You covered all the bases, the diversity and inclusion. I'm just so amazed at how this all came together, but it's a culmination of all your skills and passions.
Well, thank you. We've enjoyed this conversation.
Well,
And we've had some good reviews from
Yeah.
men and women, so it's been reassuring.
So tell me, what gives you hope for the future?
I love doing what I'm doing, and I love working with young entrepreneurs, not only young ones, but all entrepreneurs. And I love the stage. What gives me hope is that I love the stage when they're starting out. They're just so passionate, so excited to be successful, so anxious to learn from everybody around them. That's the part I love. And when people ask me to work in a company and it's at the later stage, I get frustrated because I don't see them innovating enough, that they're not open to change. And working at a university, which is my other hat, a big university, a very successful university, but yet when you want to do something that is on the edge of innovation, they don't know how to do it. So I think that we have a lot to gain from what we're going to share about our book and what people can
Amazing.
learn.
Kathy?
I think for me, I just have been so, I use the word blessed, but I've been so blessed in my career and with the people that I've met, that I really think more about paying it forward constantly and trying to be able to meet with people. And if people call and they want to have an hour, a half hour, someone has referred them to me to talk to, I'm always willing to do that, because I can learn as much from them as they can from me.
Amazing. And Laura, last but not least.
I think about when I was first starting out in my career, when you're fresh out of college and you really don't have a roadmap, right? I mean, everything's been so structured up until that moment, and you kind of get out in the real world and you're like, I want to make a difference, or maybe you have this drive to do purpose-driven work, but there's no pathway forward. And I think this book is such a valuable collection of these stories and has such powerful insights to show, there's not one right way. And so what gives me hope for the future is that, as I would have loved this as a young woman starting out in my career, to get a book and say, okay, here are the different pathways. Here are the different ways that you can turn challenges into really advantages. And I hope that more women pick this book up. I hope that they can use this as a roadmap to success on their own terms.
Well, with that, ladies, thank you so much for your time today to enlighten us on this new and wonderful book on the eve of International Women's Day on Tuesday.
Right.
Well, I just wanted to say one more thing about, we have a wonderful Canadian woman who Margaret Huber, in our book.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that. And so that was Laura Snillian, Dr. Bobby Kirshant, and Kathy Hurley on the release of their new book, InnovateHERs, Why Purpose-Driven Entrepreneurial Women Rise to the Top, being released later this month. You can go to innovatehers.com or org.
Org.
You heard that in the chat.
Yeah, and please go to the website, because we have lots of references and resources and lots more, and people can add to it.
Awesome.
We'd love that. Thank you. You can share your story there.
Thank you again. And my name is Robert Martelacci, the Mindshare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.mindshare.learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.